Welcome everybody to today's lecture with George Ritzer, entitled Putting the Consumer to Work, the Roots of Thinking about Prosumption in the McDonaldization of Society. And thank you for the interest in the event. For those who do not know the UNIBO IITK Digital Sociology International Research Group, I will briefly introduce it with a few sentences saying that this project consists of an academic cross-continental team that aims to investigate the different aspects of emerging platform society with a specific focus on physical-digital transformation. In other words, it aims to deepen the study of hybridization phenomena and the context in transition, while opening the debate to the wider public, also thanks to an open access website. Now, moving on to the conference. We are truly honored to host Professor George Ritzer, of which we could also enjoy the collaboration in the past, and today we are thankful again for his availability and interest in holding this lecture. Professor Ritzer doesn't need to be introduced, as his esteem and scientific work precedes him. I can say that he is a prized scholar in the field of social complexity and consumption panorama, and his work, beside the concurrently to the theory of McDonaldization of society, deeply analyzed, discussed the concept of presumption and the role of the presumer. Today, his analytic description allowed to an understanding of this view of this new concept until the identification and expression of these dynamics within the physical-digital hybrid reality. With that said, I now leave the floor to Prof.ssa, who will introduce George and will be ready to start the lecture. Thank you.
Ever since the group started off in 2020, we've been trying to organize a series of events which try to conceptualize the dimensions of the peculiar set of relations that we are all part of, which we refer to as the emerging platform society. And so in that context, I'm really pleased to be able to organize this very special event with Professor George Ritzer. And he truly, as Pierre mentioned, is a figure who's, in fact, a bit challenging to introduce him, because he's such a familiar figure to so many generation of students of sociology. Also, his work is so popular that it has transcended the boundaries of the discipline itself. So I struggled and I thought, okay, maybe it would be better to contextualize Professor Ritzer's work and his influence as it pertains to this particular research group. So apart from George's really compelling theoretical contributions and his contributions as an institution builder, I think what he also successfully did was to get intellectual conversations going and those intellectual connections across the globe. And in fact, both Pierre and I, we sort of founded this group. We first exchanged notes and ideas as part of a group that George was mentoring back in 2010. It was quite a prolific group on Prosumption, actually. So we are very excited that we were able to continue some of those conversations over the space of a decade. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that this particular lecture that George will give today is also extremely pertinent to our work here, because what he intends to do is to trace some of the continuities that have, that link how economic life has played out over time. And we consider that to be a very key conceptual tool in trying to make sense of how to study emerging platform societies. On a final note, I would also like to point out that we see George's lecture as something that is a precursor to our next event as well, which is an international conference where we looked at the emerging platform society from two prisms. One stream will explore questions of consumption and presumption, and the second stream will explore questions of what happens to money or what money does in the platform ecosystem. And of course, as you all know, these are both topics that George has explored in great detail. So I think it's a very exciting event for us that George could take out time today and come and talk to us about his ideas and even the development of his ideas. So with that, thank you so much, George, and we're all really excited to hear you. The floor is yours.
Oh,
Yeah, George, just 1 second for a service announcement. Please, you switch off your mic. You may keep your camera on if you wish. And so then if you wish to make a question, please post the question on the chat room. And then at the end of George's talk, we will have a question session. So George, the stage is fully yours. You have to unmute the mic.
Yeah, okay, just did that. Okay, I was just thanking Piergiorgio and Jillet. It's wonderful to see them. They're old friends. And I'm delighted to do this with them and with the rest of you. So the way I want to present this is in terms of a kind of a micro-macro relationship, the micro being, my own history and involvement in sociology, and the macro being the larger context in which this took place. So when I started out academically and personally, I was mainly interested in production, and my early education was in production. For example, I had an MBA from the University of Michigan. So interested in business administration, which obviously was oriented toward production. And after I got my degree, I went to work for Ford Motor Company for a year, obviously being involved in production. And I think at that point, the discipline as a whole had what I call a productivist bias. It was oriented toward production. Consumption was a minor issue in sociology at this time, which was the early 1960s. I also worked in industry for a while at the Ford Motor Company and didn't like it very much, and left rather quickly to go to Cornell to get my PhD in industrial and labor relations, which was also a focus on production. My dissertation and later a book at Cornell was entitled "An Occupation in Conflict: The Study of the Personnel Manager." I was working in personnel, and I did a study of personnel managers, and obviously again in the realm of production. So I actually, ironically, have no degrees in sociology. I have a bachelor's degree in a BA. I have an MBA and a PhD in industrial and labor relations. And so it's ironic that I've done so much in sociology without any degrees in sociology. Anyway, despite the fact that I had no degrees in sociology, I was hired at Tulane University, and they hired me to teach industrial sociology. Which I did, but I was quickly drawn to occupational sociology. The book on the personnel manager was obviously a book about an occupation. And so that was, again, still in the realm of production, but shifting from industrial sociology to occupational sociology. But the great thing about my being hired at Tulane was they needed somebody to teach sociological theory. And I had minored in sociological theory at Cornell, and was thrilled to be able to teach sociological theory. And that was really a launching point for much of what I did later on, which was always oriented to an integrating theory with social reality. A marginal point here was that in 1962, which was the year I got my BA, I saw my first McDonald's, and I was on a trip to Massachusetts, and it's always stood in my mind. It was kind of a key point in my history, and made an impression on me, both positive and negative, in the sense that I saw it as kind of scary for various reasons. In any case, I started writing books after the publication of An Occupation in Conflict, and wrote a book called Man and His Work, a textbook in occupational sociology, which later, in later editions, came to be called Working, Conflict, and Change. So again, all in the realm of production. But within sociological theory, I became especially interested in the work of Karl Marx and Max Weber. In Weber's case, it was his theory of rationalization, which particularly interested me, and the bureaucracy as the major example of that. And in Marx's work, it was the issue of exploitation that caught my attention. So for Weber, looking at him first, for Weber, the paradigm of his process of rationalization was the bureaucracy, in a very famous work on that topic. But to me, I began to think of the fast food restaurant as a better example of the process of rationalization. And also, that indirectly led me into the sociology of consumption, since obviously fast food restaurants were about consumption of fast food. And I should say at that point that there really was no sociology of consumption in the United States. There was a field like that in Europe, and I later became recognized by it and immersed in it, and they came to see me as a sociologist of consumption, and I came to see myself as a sociologist of consumption. McDonaldization of society arose because, as I say, I came to think of the fast food restaurant as the model for the rationalization process. So hence the term McDonaldization, which is basically an updating of Weber's theory of rationalization. But Weber's theory of rationalization was a theory of organization and applied to production-oriented organizations of one kind or another. And one of the things that I do in the McDonaldization of society is to update Weber's theory and to extend it to the realm of consumption. Quickly, Weber's theory of rationalization and mine of McDonaldization emphasizes efficiency, that these systems operate in an efficient way. They offer predictability. They are calculable, and they exert great control over both people who work in these systems and people who are served by these systems. They ultimately lead to a series of irrationalities, labeled the irrationality of rationality. So ironically, rational systems produce all kinds of irrationalities. Perhaps the most notorious example is Nazi Germany and the concentration camps operated in a very rational fashion, obviously in the Germany that Weber was where I had been writing about. And they developed a rational system for killing people. And that's kind of the ultimate example of the irrationality of rationality. But that idea of can be and has been extended throughout the social world and to the contemporary world. So I kind of found myself in the realm of consumption. I didn't really intend it, but it was an accidental result of writing about McDonaldization. There's a lot of accidents in my career, and I think in everybody's career. But I accidentally was a sociologist of consumption. And so that led to work on credit cards and a book called Expressing America in 1995. And then to another book called Enchanting a Disenchanted World, using Weber's terms of the enchantment of the modern world and its disenchantment. Again, applying Weber to the contemporary world. And I came to call what I was writing about the cathedrals of consumption. That is, that we worship and practice modern consumer culture in shopping malls and fast food restaurants and places like that. And over time, of course, that has changed. Shopping malls exploded in the 90s. But now shopping malls, at least in the United States, are dying. So we come from the explosion of shopping malls to the existence of dead malls. Many malls in the United States are dead or dying. And they're dead or dying because they're being replaced by another cathedral of consumption, mainly Amazon.com, which is coming to dominate consumption in the United States and in much of the world. So all of that is of great relevance to me and my work and to what's going on in the world around me. I'm trying to move back and forth between my theoretical orientations and these changes in the world. In 2001, I published a volume called Explorations in the Sociology of Consumption, kind of cementing my involvement in consumption. And the subtitle was that dealing with fast food restaurants, one aspect of consumption, credit cards, another aspect of consumption, and the cathedrals of consumption, such as shopping malls or even gambling casinos. So that all takes me from my origins in the world of consumption, in the world of production, to the world of consumption. And that was a sort of gradual transition. And of course, it paralleled the transition in the United States from primarily a society dominated by production and factories. And factories have been declining in the United States as production has shifted to other parts of the world. And at the same time, consumption and the cathedrals of consumption have expanded. So my transitions here are very much related to transitions in the larger world. So how did I get to Prosumption? So the first two parts of this is my initial interest in production, my later interest in consumption. How did I get to Presumption? Well, again, ironically, I was invited to speak in Frankfurt, Germany in 2007 on at a conference on Prosumption. And it led me to realize that my discussion in the McDonaldization about the putting the customer to work, which was one of the dimensions of efficiency, was an example of Presumption. So in a sense, this conference led me to focus or refocus my work on something that I hadn't really thought very much about. I mean, I had read Alvin Toffler's pioneering work, but limited in various work, Future Shock, and that's where he uses the term Prosumption. But I hadn't really related my knowledge of Toffler and Presumption to the notion of putting the customer to work in McDonald's. And so this conference served to do that. And it was, again, one of these kind of accidents of, I think the people who organized this conference had a better sense of my work than I did, in the sense of putting in the concept, in the context of Prosumption when I hadn't done that. So anyway, I started to think about Presumption more generally, and I developed the notion that we too often think in terms of a dichotomy between either production or consumption, and that we needed to think about the relationship between them. And so I've started to think in terms of a continuum. Traditionally, one could think of a production-consumption continuum. But I think of all production as a kind of Prosumption and all consumption as a kind of Prosumption. So it's a Prosumption continuum for me, which, and the issue is, which is predominant? Is it production on one end, presumption as production at one end. That is, all people who produce, when people produce anything, they're also consuming things. So production is, in a sense, a subcategory under prosumption. And on the other end of the continuum is consumption as production, that all consumption involves some level of production. We are producing things as we consume. So we really can't disentangle consumption from production. I mean, a good contemporary example is IKEA, where we very often are consuming various things, but in order to consume those things, we have to produce them. So, you know, we very often get things from IKEA that require home production in order for it to exist. But more generally, the act of consumption involves production. We're producing ideas about consumption. So it exists both at a psychological level and a physical level. So at McDonald's, we are carrying our own food to the table. So we are producing as we consume. So there's a dialectic at both ends of what we conventionally think of. I want to say what we conventionally think of as production and consumption are really subcategories of prosumption. And there's this continuum from prosumption as production to consumption as production. So that led me to various other domains and interests, digital capitalism. And I began to realize that really the home of prosumption is in the digital world, that because you can't do anything in the digital world without simultaneously consuming and producing. We produce our orders for Amazon, and we consume what Amazon sends us, and so we're constantly in this process in the digital world of prosumption. I also think started to think in terms of prosumer capitalism, that what's dominating capitalism today is prosumption. That and there's tremendous profit to be made in prosumption, or prosumption yields, I think, higher levels of profit and higher levels of exploitation than prior forms of capitalism. I mean, after all, in the early forms of capitalism, you had blue-collar workers who were underpaid, and the pluses out of that were taken by the capitalist. And so, but those who did that work, blue-collar work or white-collar work in the capitalist system, and still do, were earning some money for what they did. Maybe not enough money, but they were earning money. In prosumer capitalism, we do work for nothing. We work hard for no pay. So when you are shopping at Amazon, you're doing all the work of finding what you want and ordering what you want, and you get no pay for it. And there are many examples. A really good example, I think, is Facebook, where we are producing information, I mean, which is the basis of the success of Facebook on the one hand and Amazon on the other. And we're giving them very, very valuable, I mean, information that they could never acquire through paying people. We give this information to them free. And Jeff Bezos was quoted at one point saying he was more interested in getting people's information than he was in selling them stuff, because information is king in this world. And many of the successful online sites gather this information. We give them this information, and we are not paid for that information. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, for these organizations to acquire this information on their own. We give it to them. And so we give it to them for no pay. And we do all sorts of things online for no pay. That's not to say that there are no advantages to us, but it is a system in which the new capitalists, the giants of new capitalism, are building their wealth on the basis of the free information and the free work that we're doing for them. We don't see it that way. We see it in the main as being advantageous to us, and it is advantageous to us. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that people like Jeff Bezos have grown rich because of what we've given to him. And this is true across the digital world. I've also written about the new prosumer. Sort of the old prosumer was the McDonald's customer who physically goes to McDonald's, orders his food, gathers the food, takes it, disposes of his garbage, etc. But there's a new prosumer, and that is because there are new means of consumption. We moved away, not that we moved away, but it's a digital means of consumption, which have become much more important than the material means of consumption. So the new prosumer is one who presumes through these new means of consumption and online sites, Amazon, etc., would be among the new means of consumption. I also write about automating presumption in the sense that we are in the process of replacing the human prosumer with an automated prosumer. We live in a world of smart machines which are constantly prosuming. They are gathering information from us and they are producing that information. So my Apple Watch gathers information on my heart rate or various pieces of information, and it spits that information out as I request it. So, of course, more generally, there are lots of these smart machines in the world, which are really prosuming machines. They are consuming all kinds of things and spitting out things as a result of that. So I think we could say that when I started writing about presumption, I thought about it in the material world, the McDonald's world, and the shopping mall world, the supermarket world, which were all realms of presumption and still are. And of course, they're expanded presumption over time, so that, for example, in our local supermarkets, when I was a kid, I went to grocery stores and the grocer did work for me. I didn't do much work. I got a note from my mother, and the grocer would fill that order and do the work of gathering the goods. Now we go to supermarkets and we gather the stuff ourselves. We do that work ourselves. It also used to be that there were human beings at the checkout line at a supermarket. And so the checkout person did work for us. Increasingly now in our supermarkets, and I think in supermarkets around the world, that person is disappearing and people are doing self-scanning. And one of my pet peeves, and I should say that a lot of this comes from things that aggravate me and irritate me. And generally, it's a good index of what I'm going to write about in terms of what I'm irritated at. And it irritates me that we're being asked to scan our own food at a supermarket. I think there should be people there to do that work for us, but more and more we're accustomed to doing it ourselves. And so we're prosumers. We're doing the work that checkout people used to do. And of course, that is true across the board. So as this is expanding in the material world, it is clearly ascendant online, where sites like Wikipedia or Bitcoin or others are domains of prosumption. It's the consumer who produces Wikipedia. It's the consumer who produces. Famously, there are no banks in a Bitcoin situation. It's people who are involved in this situation who are people who consume the Bitcoins are producing the system. So presumption is clearly ascendant online. The work on the presumption overlaps with the work in a number of fields. There's Brunn's work on the producer, Ramaswamy's work on co-creation, Shore's work on the sharing economy, Jenkins on the participatory culture, Negri on factory without walls, Howe on crowdsourcing, and Shirky on consumer as collaborators, to mention just a few. All of those, it seems to me, overlap with my work on Prosumption and point to a general trend in a variety of different fields in the direction of this kind of thinking of moving away from binaries and thinking in terms of fluid relationships between things like production and consumption. So in conclusion, the point is that we've thought about production and consumption as dichotomous, but production and consumption are not dichotomous. And they're even less dichotomous today than they were ever. They're almost always dialectically related to one another. I think the key point to underscore is that production requires consumption. You can't produce anything without consuming things, consuming information, consuming raw materials, whatever is needed, you have to consume in order to produce. And consumption requires production. You need to produce work. You need to produce ideas about what you're buying in order to consume them. So we must, I think about production and consumption not as dichotomy, but as dialectically related to our work. So overall, in terms of what I've been saying, is that my work over the years is a kind of a journey from production in my early years to consumption in my middle years to presumption in my old age. And I think that reflects a general grand narrative in society as a whole. That is, we move from a society dominated by production to one dominated consumption to one dominated by presumption. Or to put it another way, we've gone through an era in which, not that these are clearly separated, but we've gone through an era of production capitalism. Capitalism dominated by production, dominated by factories, dominated by what they produce, dominated by the people who produce them, to consumer capitalism, where it's the focus shifts from the factory, not that they disappear, although they move elsewhere in many cases, but the focus shifts to consumption and to among other things, the settings of consumption, the cathedrals of consumption, shopping malls, for example. So we've moved from a focus on factories and production to a focus on shopping malls and now Amazon and consumption. And now more recently, I think we are moved into the era of prosumer capitalism, where what's dominant in capitalism is not production or consumption, but it is prosumption. And in a lot of ways, it's the most exploitative of all of the forms of capitalism, because it's exploitative of if presumption has a production phase, that phase is exploited. People are not paid for the productive work that they do. So you're not paid for the information that you provide to Amazon. People are not paid for the consumption the work that they do, such as ordering foods or self-checkout at supermarkets. And but in presumption, there is both exploitation of the individual in the productions realm. You're exploited as a producer. You're exploited as a consumer, and dialectically you're exploited by both in presumption. And I think that's perhaps the key point, that in production there was mainly exploitation of the producer. In consumer capitalism, there's mainly exploitation of the consumer. In presumption, there's exploitation of presumption, which means that the exploitation of the dialectical relationship of production and consumption. I think that recently there have been a lot of new examples of presumption, 3D printers, blockchain, and digital currency, virtual communities, fandom, influencers. Influencers are an interesting example, I think, of prosumer, in the sense that the very consumers of these things become the producers of all kinds of advertising and sales for various kinds of systems. Crowdfunding, YouTube, Zipcar, Airbnb, Pokemon Go, TikTok. My new favorite these days is Wordle. If you haven't seen or heard of Wordle, it's a game that now is in the New York Times. New York Times just bought it. And what you're given each day is 6 boxes, and you're supposed to create a 5-letter word. All you're given are the boxes. And so you create the whole game. You are the producer and consumer of that game. And I think it's to me, mainly because I do it a lot, a striking new example of presumption. DIY activities, hacking, podcasts, camming, sex work. One of my former students did a dissertation on this, and he was telling me, for example, that as they are performing sex acts on the screen, they are getting information and observing those who are observing them. And so it's a co-creation between people who are traditionally thought of as producers and those who are thought of as consumers. So there are a lot of new examples of it, and there'll be many more. So I think we've entered, in a way, a new world, no longer captured by consumption or production, but rather by presumption. And it's a new, highly exploitative method. And the thing about it is that those who are being exploited don't see it that way. And of course, that was true in Marx's day, too, right? I mean, Marx wrote about the exploitation of the worker, but the worker didn't necessarily see it as exploitative. But in this situation, we have people who are prosuming all kinds of things and getting great enjoyment from it, and don't feel exploited by it. Now, Wordle may not be exploitative, although there's talk that now that the New York Times owns it, that they're going to monetize it in some way. But at the moment it's free. But in most other cases, we are doing activities that profit others, and we are getting little or nothing in return. Certainly little economical. These huge corporations that are profiting from this, Amazon, Facebook, are not sharing their profits with us, or they are sharing very little of their profits with us, and so they become huge behemoths because of all of the free labor that we do for them. So I think that sort of brings me back to Marx and integrating Marx and Weber, in the sense that I think the new rationalized, McDonaldized world is a world which has greatly heightened the level of exploitation of virtually everybody. And again, in Marxian terms, they don't see it. They do not understand it as exploitation. They don't see it as exploitation. And as a result, most people are not going to be offended by it. They're not going to rebel against it. And that's kind of the ideal capitalist system, right? A system where people are exploited, ideal from the point of view of the capitalist, where people are exploited, but they do not see themselves that way. So I think that takes me about to the end of my story. So I'll open the floor to questions. Piergiorgio, Jillet, or whoever wants to ask some questions.
Okay, if you don't mind, maybe, hey, PJ, how nice to see you again.
Hey, PJ.
See you, PJ.
All right. So thank you, George. I think that was a a very thought-provoking talk. I wanted you to dwell a little bit about these two forms of presumption that you mentioned. I mean, the first one was the idea that there is presumption without really a human agent as the presumer, right? So you have presumption which involves machines. How would you conceptualize the implications of this kind of presumption, particularly because then you go on to link it to exploitation as well?
Well, of course, the main implication of it is that you're totally eliminating, I mean, all of this process of rationalization is designed to limit the human being. And the ultimate step is to eliminate the human being completely, to have it a purely machine-to-machine kind of relationship. Human beings produce a lot of irrationality. Human beings in all rational systems are a major source of the irrationalities in that system, those systems. So if you can eliminate the human being or limit the human being, you reduce the irrationalities that human beings can produce, and it becomes a much more efficient system. So it moves closer to the maximization of rationalization.
I think we will, I have other questions too, but maybe we can take some.
Yeah, go ahead, Jillet.
Okay, so then very quickly, also this, I was wondering if you have thought about the idea of presumption without a product itself. So for instance, with a student of mine, Abhiram, who's here, we have been looking at how multi-level marketing that model is used in the cryptocurrency scene in India. It's really a thriving scene. And it's very interesting because when you contrast it to the previous models of multi-level, there was always a product there. But when we look at this iteration of multi-level marketing, there really is, we're struggling to identify what is the product. And of course, this is, as you rightly pointed out, there's a great deal of presumption involved here. So can we think of presumption without a product in question even?
Well, I don't see how there's no product there. Maybe make that clearer for me.
So essentially, maybe, the idea is that, you buy in on a larger chain of people who are setting up their own uplines and downlines for multi-level marketing. What you end up doing is you get more and more people to join into this multi-level marketing scheme. But if you think about all the older multi-level marketing models, there will be products like, okay, you're selling Tupperware or you're selling some sort of, shampoo. But here it's very interesting that all you're doing is adding to this or adding on to a larger chain of money, but the product is nowhere to be seen. So I thought we could use.
The product is the getting of more people involved in it, right? That's what the product is in the end. Increasing the chain, no? Yes.
So so that chain is something that also existed earlier, but this is really a chain without any concrete product. Or perhaps we need to go back to also because I remember.
Go ahead. So
I remember we had a conversation also about how presumption connects to value. And if we look at it from that perspective, perhaps it's clearer to see that sometimes the product may not exist, but there is value being generated through presumption.
Right. And?
Oh, that's it.
Okay, if that's what I said, I agree.
Okay. May I make a question, George? Like, I really appreciate your talk, and I'm wondering, like, even though I agree mostly about the idea of the double exploitation, like on the consumer and the producer side, is there any evidence also about some form of empowerment of the prosumer either? Like there are some, of course, maybe may be considered as weak signal about empowerment, but by some extent also I think that this use of technologies, platforms, services in general can also lead to some form of empowerment and advantage for the prosumer. Like it's true like that Facebook or Amazon make profits from our data and our information more than with the stuff they resell us, but on the other hand, it's also true that those platforms enable us in order to do something that wasn't possible before, and of course, like having multiple opportunity, also of earning money, but also of accessing to knowledge and to other forms of information.
Well, there's no question that people gain in various ways from these systems. But I'm trying to look at them critically. Clearly you are empowered. So when you're doing self-checkout, you're empowered to do it, to pack your bag the way you want it packed, rather than having a checkout person pack it the way they want. So that's a small example, but there's lots of empowerment going on here. But that still does not contradict the point that we're doing this work and we may be gaining some power in various ways, but we're still being exploited in various ways. And I don't think those two things are in contradiction with one another. I mean, we can be empowered. We're empowered to further impoverish ourselves in a way by or further enrich the systems by giving us this power. The power to check ourselves out gives them the power to release all kinds of workers. So that so I think there's a kind of relationship there. I think there is empowerment and exploitation that is going on at the same time. And I'd always go for the negative. So I would always emphasize the exploitation of it or the alienation of it rather than the empowerment of it. I leave it to the business schools to talk about things like empowerment. I'm doing it, as usual, kind of critical sociology.
Good point. Fair enough. So there are any questions from the floor?
I think we have a couple of questions in chat.
Okay. Let me open. I see Beverly as a question, like she's asking about the fact that can we use Airbnb, Uber, Amazon, and other platform-based industry in the same context? Like, of course, they do have some analogy, but some of them laid on very different perspective of doing business. That's, I think, what Beverly is wishing to say. But Beverly, if I misinterpreted your question, please feel free to switch on your mic. Looks like she's not replying, but.
So what's the issue? That Airbnb, Airbnb is an example of Prosumption. That's the same people are the consumers of these kinds of settings are producing them. And
well,
I think that they are possibly different types of platforms. So whether what we gain or lose by looking at them from this one prism of presumption. That was how I understood the question.
Yeah, and also I think that this question probably laid also the issue related to presumption and sharing economy. Like, can we consider Airbnb like a form of sharing economy, or is a form of platform capitalism? I think that's toward that direction that she wished to.
Well, they're overlapping. It's another one of those overlapping kind of bodies of work. The sharing economy, very much relates to presumption, because the people who are sharing things are also producing those things, and so it's part of the same dialectic. It depends what you want to focus on, but I see all sharing economies as involving presumption of one degree or another. Now, I admit that there are various lenses that you can look at this phenomenon with. I mean, you can look at it, and I went through some of them. You can look at it from the point of view of presumption, and you can look at it from the point of view of sharing economy. The problem with the sharing economy is that it doesn't really speak to the bigger systems that I see as exploitative here. So that we're not sharing with Walmart or Facebook. They're gaining in all of the benefits from this, or economic benefits. We get little or no economic benefits from these systems. So where's the sharing there? I mean, I guess they give us access to people that we might not otherwise have access to, but in exchange they reap all the profits. So a sharing economy might be one where Facebook shared with us, where for each contact we provide them, we get a bit of the money that they're earning from this. But Facebook's not going to do that because that's where their billions of dollars come from, right? And the billions of dollars come from our backs. I mean, it's to me a pure a Marxian analysis in the sense that we're giving them all this stuff, and in this case for nothing, and they're reaping all the benefits, and they're sharing the profits from it. I mean, they're giving us. There's no question that we get benefits from these systems, but I don't see them much as sharing systems, or at least they're allowing us to share, but they're not sharing in the profits that they gain from it.
Okay, thank you very much, George.
Yep.
Jillet, would you like to go with the other question? It's come from one of your students, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I do have a follow-up though, George,
Yep.
to what you just said. So, when we look at companies like Facebook, or when we look at broadly the sharing economy, the question of data comes up there. And as we were discussing earlier as well, I wonder if we could turn that Weberian lens of predictability, rationality to this kind of activity as well.
The kind of activity of.
So, for instance, when Facebook uses our data, it's not only sort of making money off of the data that we share, but it's also now it is very clearly established, not just Facebook as well. I mean, other big tech companies. That they are sort of engaging in ways to control human behavior as well. We are all part of some giant behavioral models. So in that context, I wonder if we could go back to Weber's analysis of rationality and take a look at those questions that you started off with, for instance, in McDonaldization.
Right. Well, McDonaldization seems old-fashioned when you're talking about these systems, but it seems to me that they are McDonaldized, they are rationalized in Weber's terms, that they operate in a highly efficient manner, a predictable manner, and they are controlling, and they have all kinds of irrationalities. And one of the things that we've become much more aware of are the irrationalities associated with these kinds of sites and the harm that they're doing to society. And in fact, you have Facebook changing its name because the irrationalities have become so prevalent and so clear to everyone that they need a name change in order to get away from the accusations of these kinds of irrationalities. So yeah, they're absolutely highly rationalized systems. I mean, what they're able to do. I mean, Amazon is an incredible. I mean, raises rationalization to a whole new level. I mean, they humble, McDonald's in terms of McDonaldization. McDonald's is hampered in terms of rationalization by the fact that it exists in a material world and that it's serving food. All of those are limit the degree to which you can rationalize things. But when you're working in a digital world, there are virtually no limits to rationalization. So, I think it was a world that didn't exist when I started to write about McDonaldization. And as I say, I think it's an old-fashioned word or term now. So, Weber's more general term, maybe comes back into focus. But these systems raise rationalization to unheard of levels, and it's the digital quality of what they do that does it.
Like algorithmic rationalization as the ultimate form of rationality and bureaucracy. It should be like a Weber 2.0.
Let's also
consult with Weber's ghost.
Let's turn to Abhiram's question. So he has asked, how can we conceptualize money from the lens of presumption? For example, private companies are now creating their own ecosystem with their own cryptocurrencies and products and services that run on their own private blockchains. By consuming that particular cryptocurrency money, we may only have access to a specific product or service.
But it's a system that a blockchain is a system that's produced by the consumers. The consumers are the producers. And so I think in some ways it's kind of the ultimate example of presumption. Now, it is a limitation in the sense that they're being controlled. It runs against the original conception of blockchain, right? That this was a system controlled by the prosumers. Now they're being controlled by larger entities, and that kind of subverts them from the original point of view. But in the end, they are systems that are run by prosumers. I mean, Bitcoin is a system, there's no bank. It's the consumers of Bitcoin who produce the Bitcoin system. So in a way, it's the ultimate example of presumption, or an ultimate. Maybe I've used that several different times as ultimate examples. Like ultimate example keeps being replaced by some better or more ultimate example of presumption. But am I wrong to think of Bitcoin as kind of an extreme example of presumption? I am wrong.
No, I think that it works quite well. And even when we consider multiple manifestations of cryptocurrencies and NFTs in general, I think it would work well.
Right.
I don't think you're wrong at all.
Okay, good.
Okay, let's see if there are other questions. Laura has a question. Go ahead, Laura.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, thank you, George, for the insightful talk.
Sure.
And I was reflecting about the pandemic conditions. So the pandemic, I think that we have lived in the last 2 years really was a fostering to the presumption dynamics. For example, also in the public debate, issues about riders and just eat algorithms and implications, Airbnb impact on the city was part of a also public issue. So I was thinking, if besides the pessimistic view, obviously critical about what we are living now, do you think that also there will be more attention and also more conceptualization of the rights of the prosumer in society, because it is gaining so such an important, a crucial function in the in the social process, economic process, or the different kind of processes. So if you have reflected or thought about this possible development of the condition of the prosumer.
Yeah, I think that the prosumer today is sort of in the position of the proletariat in Marx's day. That is, they have enormous power, they just don't know it. I mean, the fact is that presumption, the people, more and more the people are running the system, they just don't know it. And they're allowing organizations like Facebook and Amazon and these banks that are monetary organizations that are running these cryptocurrencies to profit from it. But they are the system. And the benefits from it and the profits from it should go to them, not to these entities which are imposing themselves on it. They make it, maybe that's a bad way of phrasing it. I mean, Facebook makes it possible, this interaction of prosumers, and they deserve to profit from that, but not to the degree where they get all the profit, because they have no system if we don't aren't involved in it, and if we don't provide them with the information that they can use. I mean, again, as I think I said it earlier, there's no way that Facebook could physically collect that information. They can only get it by us giving it to them. And so we're giving away all kinds of things free, and we ought to benefit more from it.
Yeah, thank you. Also,
going back to the pandemic, I think clearly it, restricting people to their homes or making it more difficult for them to go out has, thrust them more and more onto the internet. And I think the internet is inherently a realm of prosumers, where we're producing everything that we consume on the internet. And so it's difficult, even more difficult there than anywhere else, to differentiate between the producer and the consumer. Am I the producer here or the consumer? I'm producing an answer, but you're consuming what I say and producing response to that. So we're prosumers, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep, we're all prosumers.
Okay, any other question from the floor? Yeah, Roberto, switch on your mic. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Piergiorgio. It's actually a pleasure to have the opportunity to listen to this lecture and to meet Professor Ritzer personally, also virtually, and at Madrid. Well, many thanks to the organizers, Piergiorgio, Jillet, for this chance, and congratulations to Professor Ritzer for the synthetic but penetration exposition. And apologize for my horrible English grammar and pronunciation. Just two provocative questions. If current trends toward presumption advance, how to finance the public welfare? Maybe making a participative and democratic presumption. And what is the place for citizenship in presumption? Is there a triple exploitation due to the loss of personal and collective democracy in many of the presumption practices? Well, I don't know if I have explained it. Thank you.
I only got sort of echo in your, maybe I should put my earphones on, but I think at the end, you're emphasizing the democracy associated with it. In a sense, virtual currencies, Bitcoin is a very democratic system whereby those who are involved in it are created and they have the power within that system. So, the problem again comes from organizations imposing themselves on this system and profiting from it from one way or another. So it becomes less democratic when these organizations are imposing themselves on it and exploiting it. So, and by the way, I think that the concept itself of prosumer reflects a kind of democratization that, we are alone or in interaction with each other, producing as we consume. So there's an inequality there, but that becomes subverted when organizations are involve themselves in this and use that system and use the presumption that we're all engaged in order to profit from it. So the system inherently could be democratic. I mean, I guess, if we realized, sort of again back to Marx, if we realized the power that we had, we could produce a truly democratic system. But in the main, we don't realize the power that we have, the power that's inherent in being prosumers. The power there is that we're producing the system and we should benefit from it. And we should not have imposed on it larger entities that are extracting profit from it. So yeah, I think inherently the concept implies a kind of democratization, which is not realized because it's being controlled by larger systems.
I think there's another, if that's okay with you, Roberto, can we move on to the next question, or would you like to follow up? Okay. So we have a question from Brian, one of the students at IIT Kanpur. Maybe he can just explain what the question is? Brian Gomes. Okay.
Can you hear us, Brian?
All right. I can read out the question in the meanwhile.
Hello,
Yes,
am I?
yeah, it is.
Yes, you're audible.
Hello, sir. My name is Brian. So I am. I just submitted my thesis, and I have worked on elderly Anglo-Indians who are living in Calcutta. So,
Say again, you work on what?
sorry, sir.
You work on what?
Sir, I have worked on elderly Anglo-Indians who are living in Calcutta, especially in the neighborhood of Ripon Street and Picnic Garden.
You're going in and out, so I can't quite catch what you're saying.
I think maybe you could just ask your question, Ryan.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. So, sir, in your talk, you have talked about the concept of dead mall. So, can you kindly elaborate what you mean by dead mall? And the second part is that, second part is that, do you think that mall is only related with presumption and consumption? Because in India, often what I have noticed that mall is also a place where people go as a social interaction. They will not buy a thing, but they will meet there with family members or friends.
Right, right.
Yes, sir.
True. Well, the first part is the idea of dead malls, and in the United States, at least, many of the shopping malls that were very popular have become unpopular. They've lost a tremendous amount of business to places like Amazon. And so there's a mall just down the street from me, which is largely empty. It's not quite dead. The only reason it's not dead is it's got a Costco associated with it. And so some people still come there, but the rest of the mall is virtually empty. And sooner or later, they're going to tear it down. And in many cases in the United States, they either they're dead and the buildings are there, but they're dead, there's no one there. Or they will be destroyed in order to produce housing or whatever to replace them. So people are just not going to malls in the United States to the degree that they went. And, they're kind of enchanted places, magical places. At one time, they've ceased to be magical to most people. I mean, because the magic of mall cannot compete with the magic of Amazon. I mean, their ability to ship me a product in 24 hours or 12 hours is a magic as far as I'm concerned, the way they can do that. So the magic of Amazon has greatly replaced the magic of the mall, and people are, it's just beyond that. It's a lot easier for people to order things by Amazon and physically trek to a shopping mall. So yeah, I mean, malls were places to socialize, to congregate. They were places for young people to meet, for the elderly to socialize, to go walking in the mall. It was a very popular activity among elderly people like me. But to walk in a dead mall is not quite the same as walking in a vibrant mall, and it's kind of unpleasant, dangerous. I have to go over to my mall and walk around a bit, but when I look down on it, I wouldn't want to walk there. It's empty, it's desolate, it looks dangerous. It looks like there are criminals lurking in all the doorways there when you walk around that mall. And it's so dead, it's just not conducive to socializing and social life. But there's no question in the past in the US, the malls have played that kind of social role for young people, for the elderly people, for middle-aged people to shop and to socialize as they're shopping. But I think that is declining, certainly. And you can't even, maybe when I remember when I was a kid, I would go to my local grocer in New York, and you could socialize with the local grocer. Now you're going to the mall and you're interacting with a mechanical device you're scanning your card and leaving. So even that aspect of sociability is being eliminated. So yeah, malls were in the United States a place to socialize. They are still to some degree that way, but maybe it's different in India. Maybe the malls there still play a social role that they don't play in the United States, or don't play to the degree that they did.
May I link a question to Brian's question? Like, George, in your theorization, you also talk about digital space, brick and click space, and may we stretch the notion of dead mall to digital spaces and digital platforms, such as I'm thinking about the big hype that there was on MySpace and also with Second Life, which was basically the first platform willing to unveil their own currency. But then now it's something like a cemetery where you just have avatars and lines of code occupying data space, and that's basically nothing else than that.
Well, there's no question that the history here where sites that were vibrant at one point in time decline and die to be replaced by others. Maybe we're seeing the early days of the demise of Facebook as a site for which people can socialize and interact. So there's a kind of life cycle to these sorts of things, and nothing lasts forever. Facebook will not be dominant forever. It's now trying to obviously to adapt to a new reality, make itself relevant to a new reality, and it will struggle to do so. It's struggling to do so. I think its stock prices decline dramatically. All stock prices are declining dramatically these days. So yeah, there are dead sites, right? I mean, there are many websites that existed at one point that either don't exist or no longer used and being replaced by others. It's what did Schumpeter call creative destruction? These old sites are being destroyed, and new ones are being created to take their place. The physical shopping mall has been replaced by the digital mall, and lots of digital sites have been replaced by later digital sites, and we will continue to see that process of creative destruction in capitalist systems.
Thank you.
But I think, sorry, just to link to that also, the other direction in which I thought we could take Brian's question was the linking of the sort of online shopping with having a brick and mortar outlet, right? So for instance, through Amazon or IKEA, you could have people come and pick stuff up at physical stores.
Yep.
But I think it certainly has questions for socially. What kind of interaction does this replace, this kind of an organization replace, as compared to, let's say, malls where there was a different kind of social interaction that was possible?
Right. Well, I have to ask my wife, because she's the one who usually takes our Amazon packages or our rejects, and you can do that here now by returning them to Kohl's, which is a supermarket, the department store chain. So you physically go there to bring back the package, and Amazon will take it back. Although Amazon increasingly doesn't really want a lot of things back, because it turned out that the costs of restocking this stuff is more than it is the cost of just letting it go. So people are buying all kinds of things and then deciding they don't want it and they want to return it, and Amazon will say, you won't keep it. And so we have this question of how much thievery is going on here in this system. But I mean, I think that's a really interesting development. They must track. I ordered 5 pounds of coffee from them not long ago, and I didn't like the coffee. And so I said I wanted to return it. And they said, no, just keep it. They credited me the amount for the 5 pounds of coffee. And I kept the coffee. I actually probably drank the coffee. I didn't like it that much, but I drank it. But it's just, cheaper, more rational for them to do that than it is to take these things back. But I don't think there's, if your question is how much interaction is my wife having when she takes our stuff back to Kohl's, I mean, she's described it to me. I'll have to go on a field trip with her to see what this. I'm not really good at being an empirical sociologist. Most of my sociology takes place in my head. But anyway, I think she describes it as just sort of in and out. You go in, you give them the package, you leave, and so I don't think there's much interaction associated with that.
We have a comment from PJ. PJ, would you just like to join in and let us know yourself?
Oh, it was so much not a question, but I was just interested in this dead malls conversation versus dead websites, and just thinking about like the physicality of dead malls and the way that they sort of occupy space, you know, whereas these dead sites are much easier to forget and let go of. Right. Though, as Piergiorgio mentioned, you know, on the other hand, we continue to data mine, you know, these largely dead websites, whereas, you know, the malls just get in our way and we kind of have to knock them down. Yeah. Mostly just thought that was an interesting conversation that we, the interesting connections that were being made there.
I pass by this mall, you know, every day when I'm coming home, and it's an abomination in the sense that, you know, you look at it and you say, here's this huge expanse of structures that has been built that is too expensive to tear down. It just stands there empty, and you wonder about the costs involved in creating it, and I always wonder also why those involved in it don't have the responsibility to destroy it when they're done with it. I think that, you know, all kinds of organizations have profited from these physical structures and even digital structures, but they don't have any obligation. They leave it there, and then it becomes, you know, either an eyesore or a cost to the larger community to deal with it. So, you know, I always feel that if the people who use these and profited from them also have the obligation to destroy them when they're done with them, but that's not the way it works. They leave.
A small dose of grad school nostalgia, though. I wonder if deadmalls.com is still going.
Deadmalls are what?
Deadmalls.com. We used to check it up quite a bit, I think, in class. I think that's what it was called.
I still didn't get it. Deadmalls are what?
Deadmalls.com, you know. So,
oh, okay. There is a site, yeah.
Famous site.
Yeah. Check it out.
Yeah. Let's see if there are any other questions or comments. Rajoshi, did you have something in mind? I thought you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, sorry, my video is not functioning over here due to a low bandwidth. First of all, thank you, Professor Ritzer, for this wonderful talk. I personally work on platforms, and by platforms, I mean Uber, and as well as food delivery platforms. And so I just wanted to ask a question that from the field, what I find is that the workers, the gig workers, as they're known as, they fail to categorize themselves as an identity of a worker or even as an entrepreneur, as if they are in between that, because the platforms have been always considering them that you are a free agent. You have flexible timings. You come in when you want. You go out when you want. The prices are going up and down. So you're actually an entrepreneur. But in many ways, there have been movements by activists as well as from the academia, which are telling that they should be getting an employment rights in that sense. How do we see this kind of a development within this presumption, from a presumption lens?
It was a little blurry. I didn't catch all that. Can somebody help me with the question?
Sorry, I can try. I think what Rajoshi wanted to point out was that people who sort of, you know, put in labor in platforms in the category of gig work, there's often a debate, you know, how to categorize these people. Are they workers? Are they entrepreneurs? And from the perspective of many platforms, there's a tendency to look at these people as free agents or entrepreneurs. So can we use the concept of presumption to look at this specific phenomenon?
Well, I think they want to look at it that way, so they don't have to pay them, or they don't have to pay them benefits, or so if you're seen as an entrepreneur, you're on your own, and the organization has no responsibility to it. I mean, presumption is clearly involved, but I think it seems to me it's that you want to categorize these people as entrepreneurs. It's, I think Google and remember my son for a while got a part-time job at Google, but he wasn't considered as a regular employee, and so he got no benefits, and so it creates this kind of marginal, nebulous kind of area where you're not an employee and you're not an entrepreneur. You're in some middle ground, and that's to the benefit of, say, Google to keep you in that situation whereby you have no power. You're not on the payroll. They can let you go at any time, and it creates a very expandable and contractible labor force that the organization has no obligation to. And obviously, organizations in a capitalist system prefer to have little or no obligation to their employees. And I think, to have no employees is kind of an ideal employment. Implies all kinds of responsibilities on the part of the employer. And if you're not considering these people as employees, you don't have any responsibility to them. And I think, again, back to the prosumer, they're doing work for the organization, but they're not considered employees certainly not considered employees of the organization. So again, the organization gets free labor. And so, capitalist organizations have all kinds of ways of enhancing their profit to the detriment of those who do the work.
Rajoshi, would you like to respond? Did we get?
Yeah. I got the gist.
I think we are coming to an end. Am I
Okay.
right, Jillet? There are any more questions? Do I miss
No,
something?
No, I don't think so. No, I think we've gone through all the questions in chat.
Yeah, I don't see any other question. So I'm posting some information about our activity and our website. If you wish to know further about UNIBO IITK Digital Sociology Research Group, feel free to contact me and Jillet. And before that, I mean, I'm extremely thankful to George. I'm really delighted about your presentation, and even if it's just virtually, it's great to see you and have the great opportunity to listen to your thought. Thank you very much, George. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Piergiorgio. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Jillet. Thanks again. Good seeing both of you. PJ, even good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. It was a good session in which we caught up, and you were needlessly worried about the time. This was perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Glad the timing was perfect. The talk may not have been perfect, but the timing was perfect.
No, the talk was great too.
Thank you. I was begging for a compliment there at the end, so and I got it. All right. Great seeing you,
George. Thank you very much. And a virtual applause to you.
Okay, take care.
Thank you, everybody.
See you all someday in the real world.